Hey there, friends. I'm continuing some of my coverage of the New Orleans terrorist attack. Those of you that don't know, I'm from Louisiana. I used to work in the New Orleans area. I'm very familiar with the Canal Street, Bourbon Street areas and the lack of security in those areas. I've often said that this place was ripe for the picking for some kind of either terrorist attack or something bad. Someone could inflict a lot of damage over there. And of course, now it's come. The New Orleans officials are running for cover right now. The police chief and the mayor admittedly in their press conference talk about how they knew about these weaknesses, these holes, these gaps in their security, and they were gonna take care of it. Let me show you a little bit more about what I'm talking about. First, what I'm going to do is show you the area so that you know what we're talking about when we replay a portion of this press conference. So the area I'm showing you right here, this is Google Maps, is the entranceway to Bourbon Street. If you notice, if we look to our left, that's going down Canal Street. If you look to your right, that's going down the other way to Canal Street. Of course, that's the trolley with the tracks right in the center of Canal. If you've ever been down the canal, the aquarium is on one end, which runs into the Mississippi River, and then of course the other end goes further deep into New Orleans. So this is the tight little funnel that goes into Bourbon Street. Of course, Bourbon Street does go behind us as well, but that's not the party place of Bourbon Street. You simply have to go down here for it. So as you notice, as we get closer heading into this, again, it funnels in. Notice how tight things get right here. Okay, this is important that you guys understand what I'm talking about right here. You're going to notice the police chief, and I'm not sure if the mayor discussed this or not, but they talk about the wedge in their press conference. Again, I think this was the police chief. This is the wedge that she's talking about. This little area right here that you see with the white area on each side of it, that's essentially a security pop-up wall, if you will. You can tell that it pops up at about a 45-degree angle. That plate at the bottom that has the yellow lines on it running diagonally, that is what runs upward. And you see the little red hydraulics that pull that gate up. This thing only has a little bit of electronics, a little bit of radio signal because it's controlled remotely, and some hydraulics. There's no big giant thing that is elsewhere that controls this. This is a very simple thing to control. This does not work. Admittedly, they will tell you that in the press conference, that what they call the wedge at the beginning of Bourbon Street, coming right off a canal, that this system, this wedge system doesn't work. Again, I want to remind you, we're talking about a little bit of hydraulics, a motor, a little bit of electrical stuff, and probably a Wi-Fi repeater or something like that that's receiving a signal to either open or close this thing. This was too much for them to manage. So it was open during this entire terrorist attack. Now that brings me to the whole reason why we started talking about the wedge was they were discussing the bollards. That's these things right here. Again, let me turn back around because it's easier to describe it this way. So this bollard system that you see, the bollards that are closer, or excuse me, further away from us, those are stationary. They stay in place. The two bollards closer to us slide inward to create essentially four bollards all the way across Bourbon Street, essentially blocking Bourbon Street. It pretty much does what that wedge right in front of it is supposed to do, except you can still walk in between it. So if there were, let's say, a big event or something like that, they would close these bollards, likely not close the wedge, but close the bollards so people could still walk freely without stumbling over the wedge. But we have two security systems within 15 to 20 feet of each other intending to do the same thing, which is to stop traffic from going down Bourbon Street. Now, the reason why I mention that is because traffic is allowed down Bourbon Street, and we may catch some cars here. Yeah, you see these vehicles right here. During the day, and most times, Bourbon Street, you can drive down it. It's a one-way, but you can drive down Bourbon Street. In fact, I guess some ways are two ways because I see cars going one way. It depends on how much they've had to drink, I guess. But this street can be traveled down during the daytime. It's simply whenever there's a big event, evenings, weekends, where they close off the Bourbon Street area to driving traffic and just allow pedestrian traffic to walk. Now, I want to say very importantly why I'm mentioning that. Because these bollards are essentially only here as a notification to a car that might accidentally turn off of Canal Street, which is right there. A car may accidentally turn off thinking, I'm going to drive down here because, I drove down Bourbon Street earlier today, and then realize when they see the bollards, that's my indicator that I can't drive down it right now. So no harm, no foul, right? They turn around and go the other way. Again, the bollards are merely a firm suggestion that you cannot drive down here. This is pedestrian traffic only. I say it is merely a suggestion because you will hear what the police chief says as to how the terrorists defeated this bollard and wedge system in this clip right here.
As it relates to the bollards on Bourbon Street, over 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, the city of New Orleans implemented an infrastructure project placing bollards on Bourbon Street. Shortly thereafter, the malfunctions of those bollards ensued from Mardi Gras beads on down. But the New Orleans Police Department, of course, deemed them inefficient because they did not operate the way that they were intended to do. Because the city of New Orleans is hosting Super Bowl this year, it gave the city of New Orleans an opportunity to go further and deeper with infrastructure improvements, as we've been talking about. So as a result of that, we were able to build in bollard replacement into our Super Bowl infrastructure package. And because of that, the city of New Orleans has moved forward with that infrastructure that is nearing completion. Bollards were not up because they are near completion, with the expectation of being completed, of course, by Super Bowl, way before Super Bowl. But that is the reason. Now, the New Orleans Police Department and Chief, you can speak to the deployment to respond to our needs and existing conditions.
All right, so we have been aware of the bollard situation for a long time. And we did indeed harden those target areas where the bollards are. We have patrol cars out there as a hard target, as well as with barriers. Now, I want to share with y'all, if you did not know, that this particular terrorist drove around onto the sidewalk and got around the hard target, where he did have a car there, we had barriers there, we had officers there, and they still got around. Now, the wedges that you see out there as well, we knew that had malfunction problems. And I want you to understand, let's say we put the wedge up and it got stuck. There is no way that ambulance could get in or out, people couldn't get in and out, so we knew that these were malfunction. So we did indeed have a plan, but the terrorist defeated it.
So according to the police chief, the wedge that you see right here was down just like you see it because they never use it because this system is known to be defective and hardly ever works. So, we don't use it. So that's merely just an eyesore. It doesn't accomplish anything else because they never use it. The bollard system that you see right down here in front of you, those bollards weren't even there. Why? Because you heard them say that those bollards have essentially been removed. They're not even there because they are putting some new ones in. Even though they've known the old bollard system didn't work properly, they're putting a new one in. And for 10 years, they've had this problem. They admit this in that press conference that for 10 years, they've known of this issue and they've never addressed it. And you notice that the police commissioner, or whatever you want to call her, chief or whatever, the DEI hire, that she was shocked that the terrorist had the nerve to drive around this system because she said that there was a police car parked in front of the wedge. Since they knew the wedge didn't work and they had no bollard system, they simply parked a police car right here at the entrance of Bourbon Street coming off a canal, and they thought that was adequate for keeping people from driving down Bourbon Street. And she was shocked to find that the guy drove on the sidewalk. Did you notice her shock whenever she mentioned, like, how dare he? This terrorist drove on the sidewalk of all places.
That this particular terrorist drove around onto the sidewalk and got around the hard target, where he did have a car there, we had barriers there, we had officers there, and they still got around.
So this guy drove up onto the sidewalk to get around the police car. There were no bollards, so these were not even in his way. He proceeded down Bourbon Street, killed 10 people, and injured another 35. This is a massive failure on the part of the local law enforcement, the mayor of New Orleans. These people stupidly, this shows how stupid they are, sit up here in a press conference on national television and tell everybody we knew that we had gaps in our security for 10 years. Oh, but we're doing something about it. You got to give me credit. You have to at least do this. Pat me on the back because I'm fixing the bollard system, because guess what? Now that we have the Super Bowl coming, we recognize that our system simply doesn't work, so we were going to put a new one in. Number one rule in security, and all you guys out there, law enforcement, military, security, you know exactly what I'm about to say. When you have a change in your security plan, whether it's personnel or equipment, you overlap that system. You don't keep that hole in it. You don't create a gap and leave the gap. You now, when you create that gap, you create an overlap until that gap is filled. They didn't do that. They are trying, this shows you the weakness of a DEI hire, or at least a stupid person in charge. Their explanation for why 10 people got killed is because they were in the process of upgrading the security there by taking the old bollards out, and you should understand that, hey, we're tending to it. We're putting new bollards in. That was their explanation. We put a police car there. And the nerve of this guy to drive around that police car, the nerve of him, because we were in the process of fixing this. They created the gap in security, which would have existed if the bollards were there anyway. Let's be really honest about this. If the bollards had been there and been in good working order, and that wedge was in good working order, the wedge would have still been down, and the bollards would have still probably been easily drive-aroundable, if you know what I mean. The bollards that they have here, this guy, since he drove around the police car in front of the wedge by the Walgreens, he could have easily driven around the sidewalk over here by the bollards and still continue down. So even if that wedge was working and that wedge would have been up, the guy still could have driven around the wedge, and if the bollards were there, he could have driven around the bollards. What needs to happen is there needs to be a bollard in the middle of the sidewalk that's permanent, because you don't need to raise it and lower it because you walk around it. No traffic is intended to ever drive on there. So you put permanent bollards there. These people knew this problem existed. This was never a system to prevent people from getting hurt. This system was simply there to deter traffic from ever driving down here. This was not a security system. This was a traffic system that they had in place.
I don't understand the point that you're making.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.